Welcome to Open Books, the most cozy corner of the world. Before we dive into our enchanting bedtime story, don't forget to grab your favorite blanket, find that perfect comfy spot. So, get ready to unwind, relax, and let the magic of storytelling guide you into a world of dreams. In a quiet village, Little Red Riding Hood is a lively and lovely girl in the land. Her family life is simple and happy, and she has a deep bond with her grandmother. Little Red Riding Hood, the girl in the red hat, always runs around the village with a sunny smile. Her family lives in the beautiful nature, and every day seems to be a picture of tranquility and beauty. The love between Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother is one of the most beautiful scenes in the village. One day, the sun shone on the roofs of the houses in the village, the birds chirped outside the windows, and the day began in the village. Little Red Riding Hood's mother was preparing food in the kitchen for Little Red Riding Hood to take to her grandmother. Grandmother was ill and needed some warm company. Red Riding Hood, come here a minute, I have something to tell you. Mum called out to Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood, her red hat shining in the sun, ran into the kitchen and asked with a big smile, "Mummy, what is it?" Mummy smiled and said softly, "Grandmother is sick and we are going to visit her. I have prepared some food for her, will you help me bring it over?" Little Red Riding Hood nodded immediately and said without hesitation, "Of course, Mummy. I'm on my way." Little Red Riding Hood sorted out the food and put it into a little basket, then gave her mummy a kiss and set off down the path to her grandmother's house. Beneath her feet, the path wound through a beautiful forest. The sunlight poured through the gaps in the leaves, creating beautiful shadows on the path. Little Red Riding Hood trod the path happily, her heart filled with longing for her grandmother and excitement for adventure. At that moment, a big gray wolf suddenly appeared in front of her. The wolf looked clever and cunning, with a hint of danger in his eyes. However, Little Red Riding Hood did not realize the wolf's trickery, and she innocently asked, "Hello, Mr. Big Bad Wolf, is there anything I can do to help?" With a friendly smile and a wag of his tail, the wolf said, "Little Red Riding Hood, I know you're going to your grandmother's house, and there's a shorter path that will take you there in no time." Little Red Riding Hood nodded happily and said thankfully, "Thank you for telling me, Mr. Big Bad Wolf. I'm going to hurry to see grandmother." So Little Red Riding Hood walked trustingly into the depths of the forest, while the Big Bad Wolf followed her with a sly glint in his eye. Little Red Riding Hood set out on the path to her grandmother's house, her heart filled with worry about her grandmother. She remembered her grandmother as always being so warm, and now her grandmother's illness made her feel worried. As the path turned, Little Red Riding Hood came to her grandmother's cottage. She knocked gently on the door and entered, only to see her grandmother lying on her bed, looking a little pale. "How are you, grandmother?" Little Red Riding Hood asked worriedly. Grandmother smiled faintly and raised her hand to touch Little Red Riding Hood's head and said, "Dear Little Red Riding Hood, I'm a little out of sorts, but it warms my heart that you're here." Little Red Riding Hood took out the food that her mum had prepared and placed it beside her grandmother's bed, saying, "This is the delicious food that Mummy has made for you. I hope that if you eat it, you will recover sooner." Grandmother looked gratefully at Red Riding Hood and said, "Thank you, dear." The food looks delicious and I will certainly enjoy it. Little Red Riding Hood stayed with her grandmother for a while, then said, "Goodbye," and returned to the village. The thought of her grandmother still lingered in her heart, and she enjoyed the warmth of the time alone. However, the people of the village began to notice a suspicious wolf in the neighborhood. They see the wolf in the fields, along the paths, and even at the edge of the village. People became worried, especially when they learnt that their grandmother was ill and the grandchildren became the center of attention in the village. Have you heard? A suspicious wolf has appeared near the village. The women of the village gathered to talk. Yes, I saw it in my backyard yesterday. It's been prowling around and seems to be heading in the direction of the village. One of the villagers said. The news spread quickly and the residents of the village became cautious. Children were ordered to stay home, and families took extra precautions. People feared that the wolves might pose a danger to the village. Little Red Riding Hood heard the news too, and she was worried. She was worried about her grandmother's condition, and the presence of the wolves added another layer of anxiety to her heart. "Mummy, there is a suspicious wolf near grandmother's house. I am worried about grandmother's safety," Little Red Riding Hood told Mummy worriedly. Mummy frowned, and after much thought said, "We can't put grandmother in danger. I will talk to the others and see what we can do. You must be careful too, and not act alone." Little Red Riding Hood nodded, knowing that her mother was thinking of her and her grandmother's safety. However, she was still worried about her grandmother. The atmosphere in the village became tense, and patrols were set up at the entrance to try and keep the wolves away. The children are kept at home and the villagers become more aware of their surroundings. In the meantime, the wolf is plotting something sinister in the depths of the forest. It has been watching Little Red Riding Hood and is looking for an opportunity to take advantage of her grandmother's illness and the unrest in the village to carry out a bigger plot. With the village on edge, Little Red Riding Hood's mum realizes that she must take action to protect her grandmother and the village. So she decided to take matters into her own hands and make some delicious food, hoping that the warmth of home-cooked flavors would help her grandmother to recover. Mum knew that this was not only a mission, but also a responsibility to her family and the village. She stood in the kitchen, rolled up her sleeves, and started cooking. She prepared her grandmother's favorite chicken soup, fresh vegetables, and fragrant bread. The kitchen smelled delicious and mouth-watering. "Come here, Little Red Riding Hood, we'll put all this food into baskets and you'll have to be careful taking it to grandmother," Mummy called out to Red Riding Hood with a smile. Little Red Riding Hood couldn't wait to run into the kitchen and look at the delicious food on the table. She said happily, "Mummy, there are so many delicious things to eat. Grandmother will love it." Mummy carefully put the food into a small basket and gently placed a red hat on Little Red Riding Hood's head. She looked lovingly at her daughter and said, "Be careful, Little Red Riding Hood, and don't run away. Grandmother is waiting for you to arrive, and this food will give her a touch of warmth and strength." Little Red Riding Hood nodded and took the basket, filled with love for her grandmother as she prepared to embark on this special journey. Stepping out of the village, Little Red Riding Hood carried her basket of delicious food on her back and set off down the path that led to her grandmother's house. The sunlight fell on her through the leaves of the trees, and her hat swayed gently in the breeze. Though her worries about the village remain in her heart, her kindness and her longing for her grandmother propel her onward. Walking into the forest, Little Red Riding Hood felt a special kind of tranquility. Birds were singing in the treetops, and the small animals nearby were busy with their lives. However, just as she was getting deeper into the forest, a big gray wolf quietly appeared. "Hey, Little Red Riding Hood, wait!" the wolf called out to her in a hurry. Little Red Riding Hood stopped and turned her head to look at the wolf, asking with a curious face, "Who are you? Why are you calling me?" The wolf walked up to her with a smile and said, "I am a resident of this forest, and seeing that you are carrying so much delicious food on your back, I came up to say hello to you." Little Red Riding Hood smiled innocently and said, "So that's how it is. Do you want to come along and visit your grandmother? She's sick and probably needs some tasty food too." A strange gleam flashed in the wolf's eyes, but he then smiled and said, "That's a good idea, I can accompany you too." So Little Red Riding Hood walked with the wolf, unaware of the wolf's true intentions. The wolf followed Little Red Riding Hood, walking quietly along the way. Although Little Red Riding Hood was full of innocence and kindness, there was a strange gleam in the wolf's eyes. He had learned that Little Red Riding Hood was going to her grandmother's house, so he decided to arrive earlier to plan a bigger plot. The wolf hurried to his grandmother's house, which was quiet and peaceful. He entered gently and found his grandmother's bedroom. Grandmother was lying on her bed, looking a little weak. "Hello, grandmother. I heard you were sick, so I came to see you," Wolf said, pretending to be concerned. Grandmother smiled faintly, but a flicker of alarm flashed through her eyes. "Oh, thank you for your concern, but I don't feel quite right." A shock went through Wolf as he pondered for a moment, then said in a soft tone, "Perhaps I worry too much, grandmother. I heard that Little Red Riding Hood was coming to visit you too, and I was afraid that something bad might have happened to her on the way, so I came to tell you in advance." Grandmother felt a little more at ease, and thought that perhaps she had worried too much. The wolf took the opportunity to occupy the grandmother's bed, intending to realize his trick before Little Red Riding Hood arrived. Just then, Little Red Riding Hood finally arrived at her grandmother's house. She knocked on the door and entered the house, but she felt a strange atmosphere. There was a strange figure lying on her grandmother's bed, and it did not look like her usual grandmother. "Grandmother, what's wrong with you?" Red Riding Hood asked suspiciously. The wolf assumed her grandmother's voice and replied, "Dear Red Riding Hood, I am sick and a little weak. You have come at the right time, I need some food, can you bring it to me?" Little Red Riding Hood still had doubts in her mind, but she took the food out of the basket and placed it by her grandmother's bedside. She continued, "Grandmother, why do you sound a little strange?" The wolf faked a smile and said, "It's the illness that makes my voice sound strange, don't worry." "Don't worry. Sit down and let's talk." Little Red Riding Hood was slightly worried, but she sat down on the edge of the bed and began to chat with her so-called grandmother. She asked about her grandmother's health and talked about the village, however, she vaguely sensed something was wrong. "Grandmother, why are your eyes so big?" Little Red Riding Hood asked suspiciously. The wolf gritted his teeth in secret, but he pretended to be relaxed and said, "Oh, it's because I'm sick and I'm a bit uncomfortable with the light, so they look a bit strange." "Don't worry, Little Red Riding Hood." Little Red Riding Hood's misgivings deepened, and she felt a chill run down her spine. She said a silent prayer for her grandmother's safety and began to think about what would happen next. The crisis that lies beneath the goodness will soon be revealed, and Little Red Riding Hood will be faced with a choice as to whether she can outwit the wolf who is pretending to be her grandmother, and keep herself and her loved ones safe. Just as the wolf was about to attack, suddenly the hunter from the village passed by his grandmother's house and heard something unusual. He slowed down, listened carefully, and then alertly walked towards the house. The hunter knew that something dangerous might be happening here. The hunter gently pushed open the door and was shocked by the scene before him. The grandmother and Little Red Riding Hood on the bed were not facing the real grandmother, but a big gray wolf. When the wolf saw the appearance of the hunter, his face instantly turned pale. "Humph, so this is your trick," the hunter said sternly. Without hesitation, the hunter raised his bow and arrow and aimed at the wolf's heart. The wolf finally showed its true colors. It smiled strangely, but it was obvious that it could not escape from the hunter. The arrow streaked through the night sky and struck the wolf's heart with precision. The wolf let out a shrill howl and fell to the ground. Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother watched the scene in shock as the hunter quickly approached them. "Everyone is fine, I got here just in time. This wolf is an old fox, trying to take advantage of Red Riding Hood's innocence." The hunter comforted Red Riding Hood and her grandmother. Red Riding Hood looked at the hunter with gratitude and respect. She learned the importance of protecting herself and felt the warmth of her family and village. The hunter helped Red Riding Hood and her grandmother rearrange the house to make sure everything was safe. He reminds the people of the village to remain vigilant, for there may be other dangers in the forest. After hearing about Red Riding Hood's experience, the people of the village become more alert to the presence of wolves, and they all work together to protect the peaceful land. By the end of the story, both Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother have recovered and are back to their old health. Life in the village gradually returns to peace and quiet, and the people become more united and caring to each other. That's the end of today's story. I hope you'll listen to this and fall into a deep sleep. If you enjoyed tonight's story, please like, subscribe and share this for us before you go to bed. Sleep tight, dream big, and may your night be filled with the most sweet dreams. Good night, my friends.